All right, so I just wanted to show, this is an upcoming feature, not live yet, but will be soon, is this small sort of carriage piece that we put on the T-nuts for the pivot handles. So what this does is sort of helps it sit in the extrusion a little bit tighter. So the typical T-nut fit is pretty sloppy, and for these handles, when they're loose, that means they can kind of bind a little bit as they rotate. So when we put these on here, we can, so it sits on the T-nut, it's captive on each side, and then you can slide it into the channel. This is a slightly tighter fit, and what that should allow is that when it sits in there, nice and snug, the T-nut doesn't actually move in the channel. And so also has a bonus feature of the T-nut tends not to slide. So if you ever did lose a handle, I'll just show you an example of that here. Once it's come out, the T-nut will stay in place and it won't want to slide down the extrusion so much. So once that's live, if you have those in your kit, you can install them. Basically, when you feed the extrusion into those T-nuts on the handles, this will help it stay in place. The next step is to get the arm into this pivot. And just as a reminder, these pivoting lever handles, don't put glue or Loctite on these. In fact, I would suggest putting a little bit of grease, oil, anything that you have around on the thread of these, just to help them turn, because these are the parts that you want to rotate in the assembly. And just be mindful not to get any grease or Loctite on these rubber pieces. And I'll put this back in. But that can just help make the motion feel a little bit nicer as you're doing this. All right, so this is the last tricky extrusion alignment, I promise. But we want to get, it's a little bit dark in there to see as well, but we want to get our extrusion lined up through all 4 of these T-nuts, which can take a minute. So, you know, grab a cold beverage if you need one, and let's get this started. Maybe this is a better view to try and show how I line up these pieces. It's the first 2, and then these last 2. If you do find that, you know, there's a lot of play here and it's getting hard, sometimes I will just, you know, take out a little bit so that it's not quite so loose. It's a little easier to keep your fingers on these pieces as you push this through. So I'll typically try to get one in there, but not push it through too far, otherwise you'll have trouble aligning the second one. And then get the second guy in there as well. And this honestly can be a bit finicky, and you do need to get the spacing of these guys correct, but then it should slide in like that. You can put an end cap on this piece. It's pretty hidden, so sometimes I don't bother. So in this case, will just leave it. And so now we come to tightening the lever handle and both of these pivot screws. And the pivot screws are a little bit different than all of the other screws. All of the other screws, when you tighten them down, you know, they tighten, but what you're really doing is compressing this 3D printed part against the extrusion. And so these won't be able to spin. They'll be really snug and tight. But the pivot piece, because we don't have that washer underneath the head, it's actually long enough to bite into the extrusion. And you will not be able to see that from this view. But basically what happens is this screw bites down right into that metal piece. And so I'll show you this. When we tighten this up, and I'll just do them finger tight to start, you do want to give a quick test. Make sure that you can pivot this through the full range. You don't want the true extrusion pieces to interfere as you do that. If they do, you need to pull your extrusion out a little bit further. But when we tighten this pivot, so I just start to feel resistance here, you can see this piece is still free to spin. And so we want to tighten these. You can feel it really biting into the metal. You want to keep tightening this until you start to see this pivot spacer, just start to get a little bit of friction. See, it doesn't spin freely anymore, but you can still rotate it. That's about the amount of engagement that you'd like. I'll repeat the same on the other side. And again, this is pretty tight, trying to get Loctite all over yourself like I did. And so if you can spin it freely, I'd recommend tightening it a little bit more. You want to just be able to turn, but not freely. So I can turn this, it's not too tight, but it doesn't spin freely. And that should give you a pretty good action on this that doesn't have too much play. If you do want a bit more friction on this so it doesn't fall under its own weight, you can tighten these up just a little bit more, and you'll see now when I do this that this has a little bit of friction. I kind of like the feel of that myself.